Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Falcon's Rest is a bar and grill on Old Route 7. It is located where 3 counties intersect, and is located a little outside the city limits. Rest, as you know, is sometimes called a cop bar, because a significant number of visitors are law enforcement officials. As a place for a secret meeting, it would be the last place on most people's list, which would put it at the top of my list. I parked in the well-filled parking lot and headed for the main entrance. As befits cop bars, Rest is better equipped than most others, with a large open bar area lined with seating tables. There were a lot of visitors here on the last Friday of the month, but there was no big crowd. The situation was perfect for my meeting with Sergeant Devin Cross. There were enough witnesses here to make the meeting seem like a secret. Upon entering, I met the hostile stares of most of the visitors. I didn't expect anything else because the lawyer was suspected of murdering his unfaithful wife and her lover, a police detective. Of course, there was no verdict or indictment. It's hard to do anything without evidence. No bodies were found, and the lover's car disappeared along with the lovebirds. Nevertheless, I was considered guilty. The couple disappeared without a trace. I had a motive, and I was a rundown lawyer. Who needs evidence outside the courtroom? Devin, who arrived, didn't look too pleased with my choice of meeting place. He was a tall, well-built black man. He could be called a man of honor. He is here to repay a debt and thereby cleanse his soul of the guilt he bore for being beholden to a man with my reputation. Now, dear reader, I will be frank and say that I am someone who is called a dishonest or hardened lawyer, who does not pretend to the slightest moral qualities. I am an unwitting accomplice in half a dozen organized crime cases. The day he walked into my office with a thick stack of papers on the implementation of the pledge, poor Devin was going through a really hard time. Devin Cross, then a Metropolitan Police officer, fell victim to predatory mortgage fraud lenders, and in those early days of 2008, he and his wife and 4 children were supposed to become another sad homeless man. He bypassed all honest and quasi-honest lawyers without receiving any significant help. He turned to me out of sheer desperation. To tell the truth, I don't know why I helped him. There was nothing special about it for me. He was an honest policeman and a good man, loyal to his friends, but not someone I could take advantage of. He couldn't pay. Being honest, he told me about it right away. Scammers from the internet took his last dollars. The foreclosure was issued the next day. He was just sitting in my office, a big, physically strong man, with tears in his eyes, and talking about his daughter, his little princess. She had cancer, and he didn't know how to tell her and her brothers that they were about to lose their home. To stop the sale, I filed for bankruptcy. Then I asked some of my less decent clients to visit a mortgage broker and get a confession that the documents used in the foreclosure were fake. In other words, the mortgage fraudster, faced with 2 even more violent criminals, for once told the truth. Then all it took was a bribe to the court, more than Deutsche Bank was willing to pay, to get real justice for once. Why did I do all this? I still can't figure it out, but it was hard for Devin Cross to live with the knowledge that his family's house was saved by a scammer like me. "You've chosen a strange place to meet," he said. "Even a guy like me has a conscience. I couldn't let you get into trouble by helping me." "And that's why you chose this place?" "What is it?" he asked when Lottie, the barmaid, came over. She was dressed as usual in a tight top that did not cover her stomach, and trousers that seemed to be painted. She was a very beautiful girl who was not afraid to show her advantages. "What can I offer you, Bruce?" she asked me. We had a long relationship consisting of harmless flattery and excessive advice on my part. She had a young son, but there was no man at home, and she made the mistake of choosing attractiveness over reliability. I could see how tense Lottie was. Everyone said I was guilty. Accordingly, I must be guilty, and therefore anyone associated with me will suffer. However, I noticed that Lottie came to the table when she could have shifted the service to me. Lottie was a good friend. As it turned out, I had more people like her than I thought. I didn't want them to get hurt because of their loyalty. I needed to do something to get my life back and reassure people that they could relax around me. In turn, Devin Cross threw me a lifeline, but I needed something more. "Bring us 2 Boston beers, Lottie," I said. "I have to admit that you have guts, counselor. Go to a place where Paul Moreno's friends and work buddies are gathered," Devin said. "Paul Moreno is the bastard who seduced my wife and threw me into the shit. On the night of March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, he, his Ford GT, and my wife disappeared, and the night before, thunderstorms replaced each other, flooding 3 counties around Schoharie Creek. In any of the western states, this body of water would be called a river, but here it was mistakenly called a stream. This tempting name has led to a lot of suffering. People stubbornly continued to throw bridges and build around this treacherous but modestly named watercourse. A high price was paid in lives and property for the incorrect assessment of Shokari. By the beginning of the 18th of March, all emergency crews were busy rescuing people who found themselves in a difficult situation due to flooding. For several days, no one noticed that my wife and her asshole lover were missing. Then, of course, suspicion immediately fell on me. The courage of the city takes, as they say, I told Devin, and we chatted about nothing while he prepared for what he came for. I waited for 2 beers and then I said, "Just say what you want and I'll do the rest myself. Trust me and no one will ever believe that the tip came from you." Then he leaned over and whispered, "There is a warrant, and on Sunday at 6 in the morning you will be raided at home and office." I pushed the chair away and jumped up so that he fell and then shouted, "Listen, when I need advice, I won't ask some pig from the subway about it, and then she would be a better friend than you. For the last time, I do not know what happened to my wife." I ran out, leaving behind a rather confused Devin, but he was a smart guy and realized that everyone would believe the worst about him. He'll be seen as an ambitious cop looking to get ahead using our relationship. My confession would be a feather in any cop's hat. Trying to get a confession out of me wouldn't hurt him, but being seen with me in a secret meeting would ruin him. In this case, everything was so public that no one would believe that he warned me. Exiting Falcon Rest, I sighed. The fact that everything has come to such a deplorable state is only my fault. I let my heart get the better of my head. Now I have to work hard to get out of the continuous troubles that we in this country call justice. And yet the words from my late wife's diary haunted me. They were a swarm of killer bees, stinging my heart until all the blood drained out. The diary of Elaine Gray, Mrs. Bruce Gray, 1st of October. I saw him again today. He is very tall and handsome with wavy black hair. Jenny says she knows him. In fact, she slept with him. He's a police officer, which means he's following me because of something related to Bruce. It's hard to believe that someone as ordinary as Bruce can arouse such suspicion in others, but I think it's because he's a lawyer for such high-profile criminals. After all, the people he deals with are much more interesting than poor Bruce. Don't get me wrong. I love him very much. He's a teddy bear, the kind of man you feel safe with, and why people think he's dangerous, I'll never know. Jenny says the cop watching me is a real stud, very gifted. His name is Paul Moreno. Jenny has been dating him for the last 6 months. Her husband Bob is a clone of my Bruce, except that he has a boring real estate practice, not some criminal defense lawyer in a black hat. You can't blame Jenny for succumbing to the persuasions of a police officer. After all, the temptation is so great. After 7 years of marriage and 2 children, she's looking for a little thrill. At least that's what she says. After 15 years of marriage with my 14-year-old daughter, I'm ready for a rocking chair on the back porch. Women like me just don't attract the attention of young stallions. It makes me feel so old. October 15th. Bruce is away again. I swear this man is going out of town more and more often. If it had been anyone else, I would have suspected infidelity, but this man is as faithful as a spaniel and almost as exciting. I joined the gym today. Jenny talked me into it. She's into fitness and she needs a partner. I'm not in such bad shape, not like Bruce, who is suffering from a midlife crisis, but Jenny needs a partner, and I could use a physical tone. I've increased my morning run from 1 to 2 miles, but I need to work on my stomach and butt. I feel anxious about the empty nest. Maybe getting in shape will help. And why did I let my 14-year-old girl persuade me to let her go to this boarding school? I swear Rachel is just like my mother, all female ambition. No concern for others. My mother still ridicules my choice of profession, but I believe that helping others is the highest vocation that anyone can aspire to. The work of a social worker is often frustrating, but on those rare days when you realize that you have helped another person change their life, there is no greater reward. On the other hand, Rachel may be trying to avoid the stigma of Bruce's profession. People say such cruel things. A teenage girl can be very sensitive. It might be better for everyone if Rachel left, but a mother can't help but miss her child. I saw him again today. God, he's beautiful. He was in my gym. What a stud he is. He was wearing such a tight suit. You could see the sculpted shape of his abdominal muscles, but I tried not to look at the bulge in his shorts. It can't be that it's all about her. Why he keeps following me, I'll never know. But Paul Moreno is certainly pleasing to the eye. 17th of October. I saw Paul Moreno at the gym again today. He caught me looking at him, but all he did was keep eye contact until I was forced to look away. Jenny says he must be interested in me, but I can't figure out why, unless it's related to Bruce. When I got home, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I satisfied myself. I took a glass of wine and my silver bullet vibrator, then leaned back against the headboard. I tried to let my imagination run wild, but it kept coming back to Paul, his hard, muscular body and enormous dignity. I tried not to think about him. It seemed so disloyal to Bruce. But this is just a harmless fantasy. There's nothing wrong with fantasies, right? 2nd of November. I went to vote today, but it doesn't matter. As I was leaving the polling station, I saw Paul again. He wasn't trying to hide. He hasn't been following me for a while, but he's been back in the last few days. He even greeted me. I stopped and spoke to him. "Are you back to spying on me again?" I asked. "Well, that's my job and my excuse." "An excuse? What would you say if I was just following you? Why would you do that? Have you looked in the mirror lately?" "Oh, wait. I am the mother of a teenager. Have you ever heard the term MILF?" "No, but what is it?" "It's a term for a beautiful mother like you who turns on all the young guys." "Stop, I'm an old woman." "Yes, unfortunately you are a mother, but not old, just mature." Then I saw a friend and interrupted the conversation. I can't believe he's flirting with me like that. Of course, after going to the gym, I lost 5 kilograms and tightened my ass. But still, such a young hot guy was interested in me. It's certainly worth continuing in the gym. At first I was scared of all these young girls with their strong bodies, but if I find a personal trainer and practice, it will bear fruit. Bruce, of course, noticed. 24 roses have just arrived. When I called and asked why, he just said he wanted to send them to his beautiful wife. What can you say about such a man? I love him very much. I may be flirting with a handsome young man, but I will not betray my loving husband. "Jake," I said as soon as he picked up the phone. "My God, do you know what time it is, counselor?" "I've been calling you since about 9. "I was at work," Jake Trumbull replied. "Well, I have a new job for you." "Can't she wait?" "No, the highest urgency." "Well, what about it?" "By dawn on Sunday, I need a 100% black blanket in my residence and office." "This Sunday?" "Yes, that's it. It takes at least 72 hours, and you're giving me 24 at best." "I'm sorry, I've just been informed that I need it." "Well, it will cost you well." "How much?" 35, Jake said. "After all the things I've thrown at you, this is a special price. For anyone else, it would be 50. Jake didn't say that it was unlikely that I would survive after I sent him another case. Moreover, at the moment, whether he was a business partner or not, I was in no position to bargain. He could have put any price on me and I would have had to pay. "Okay, just do it," I said. November 9th. I've seen Paul 3 times in the last week. Now he's always smiling and waving at me. Jenny had a full-fledged affair with this man. She says he's the best person she's ever had in her bed. He's 29, 8 years younger than me. Jenny says he makes her feel like she's being taken for the first time. Nothing compares to the sensations that he gives. It can't be that big, can it? I'm afraid just thinking about him makes me horny. I attacked Bruce last night when he came home. I think there are some advantages in the fact that our daughter is not at home. Bruce acted superbly. Am I really so depraved that I need to think about another man when my husband is making wonderful love to me? Today, while I was sitting at Starbucks sipping my mocha latte, Paul came and sat at my table. For a long time, he sat silently and looked at me while I studiously ignored him, but finally broke the silence. "I've been reassigned," he said. "What? I'm not officially following you anymore. What does this mean?" "Well, among other things, it means that my superiors have decided that whatever crimes your husband committed, you are not involved in anything illegal," he said. Then he reached across the table to cover my hand with his and said, "But it also means that now I can tell you how much I like you. I wish we could get to know each other better. You know I'm married, so what does it mean to get to know me better?" He reached out with his other hand and took mine between his own. "It means that you are a beautiful woman married to a man who is not able to satisfy you. You deserve to experience the kind of love that it should be between a man and a woman. And what about Jenny? I heard that you're fine with her. What Jenny and I had was purely betting. She's not satisfied with her marriage, but I'm looking for something more. Besides, you can't believe that any man would prefer Jenny to you," he said with a smile. "As I said, I'm married. I have never cheated on my husband." "Can he say the same thing?" "You've seen my husband. What do you think?" "I think we both know you deserve more." With that, I stood up, leaving most of my latte unfinished. I had to get out of there. This man had such an influence on me that I felt uneasy. 1st of December. I hadn't seen Paul since he bumped into me at the cafe, and I began to be afraid and at the same time comforted by the fact that we might not see each other again. I regretted it. His attention was amazing to my ego, and I had to admit that I wanted him on a purely physical level. Moreover, I have never been with any man except my husband. I admit I was curious to know what another man would be like, especially one so gifted and such a skilled lover. After work, I was walking to my car in the parking lot of the Department of Social Services, DSS. I was more than a little late, delayed by paperwork. The playground was well lit, but empty. When I walked to the car, I had a clear feeling that someone was watching me. I bent down to open the door, and suddenly he was next to me. I jumped back in fright. "Paul, you almost scared me to death. Are you stalking me now?" "I'm sorry," he said, feeling my waist with his hand under my open coat. "I just had to see you. I think about you all the time. I guess I should have been scared, but the fact is, he was on my mind almost all the time. I wanted to see him again. Please," I begged. "Leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband." In response, he just bent down and kissed me. He was so big and tall, so manly and strong. He overwhelmed my feelings, and, as in romantic cliches, I felt electricity in his kiss. Some kind of spark passed between us. "I need you," he said, "more than any woman I've ever known. If it were only on my part, I would leave you alone, but I can feel your body calling to me." I couldn't resist kissing him back, but then I pushed him away, jumping into the car and saying, "I can't. And I would like to, but I can't." They didn't bother to knock. At dawn on Sunday morning, 4 officers dressed as stormtroopers broke into the door lock and broke into my house. I think they expected to find me asleep. I was on my feet in the kitchen and cooking what the travel brochures call a full English breakfast. Of course, I replaced the salmon with smoked fish, but I found a specialty store that sold kidney pie. I was just beating scrambled eggs in a large frying pan when the first stormtrooper burst into the kitchen. "I hope you like scrambled eggs," I said, but he grabbed me and pushed me out of the house. I was held in a police van while my house was being taken apart. They did the obvious. They tore off the carpet and dug up the flower beds. I was glad that I mostly chose wooden floors. They lifted a few planks, but the upper floors were mostly left untouched. The basement was trashed. Most of all, I didn't like that they broke into the trunk of my car. It seemed like pure malice since I had left the keys in the ignition. But destruction seemed to be the order of the day. For all that, they weren't that bad. When the destruction of my house stopped, several officers with whom I had become friends over the years invited me to lunch at Denny's restaurant. "Where did you put the corpses, Bruce?" they asked, while I was eating what the menu called a big breakfast, which turned out to be a decided disappointment after the meal I had planned. "As far as I can tell, there are no corpses. Come on, they disappeared in March. It's October now. Do you think it will rain today?" It was very dry after those spring and summer storms. With my flower beds gone, I'll have to replant the bulbs if I want flowers this spring. But still, I'm in a better position than all those people around Shahari Creek, I said, referring to the flood at the creek. My interlocutors at Denny's didn't pay attention to the flood victims or the flowers. They were only interested in one thing. They desperately wanted my confession because in the end, they didn't actually have any evidence. The problem was that I knew that such a state could change as quickly as a stream could overflow. If I were you, I wouldn't expect to see spring flowers, but it will be easier for you if you help us. We know that you had a good reason for what you did. Maybe you just lost your head. Stop being a lawyer for once and become a man. Take responsibility and we can help you. No, I don't think it's going to rain. It looks like a drought awaits us after the rain. I'll stop by Laws's for the light bulbs. Okay, let it be your way, lawyer, but in this state, cop killers are fried. You should think about it carefully. The 9th of December. I've had a hell of a day. We got an early call. 5 children need protection. I don't usually work for Child Protective Services. However, right now we have a busy season and a time of the year when we don't have enough employees. Due to the bad flu season and the fact that people needed time for the holidays, they had to be flexible. However, 5 children under the age of 7 in need of emergency care is a bad day. They were all traumatized. They had just seen their mother almost beaten to death by the man they called father. He was only a blood relative for the 2 of them, but still, he was the one they hoped for as protection, and he betrayed them. I didn't want to separate them or put them in the county center for Christmas, but what could I do? Around noon, I found a couple in their late 60s who had raised their own children and were still in great physical shape. Both have recently become retired, suffering from a loss of purpose in their lives. The wife was a nurse, and the husband was a road engineer. By 4 o'clock, we had temporarily placed the children and created a support system for the new foster parents. I felt pretty good when the State Security Service called and said they were unhappy with the placement of children. It was the same old nonsense you always get from the state. The well-being of children is not as important as some interpretation of the rules that they have decided to accept as the truth. Can you believe they were worried that childcare payments were being made to people in the state pension system? This can be considered a double payment, the woman from the state said. We've been beating around the bush on this issue for an hour. The matter came to the head of the district administration and the state DSS commissioner. At that moment, when I already thought that the case would not work out, I received a call from potential foster parents. When will the children arrive? The woman asked. We have everything ready. Both my daughters are here to help. Well, you see, the state is worried that payments for foster children will be unacceptable since you receive a state pension, I said. What was said next was uttered in genuine anger. Well, tell that asshole governor to keep his lousy payouts. Just send these kids to us. When the county executive heard this, she laughed and said, All right, send the children, then we can always sue the state for this money. It took me another 3 hours to get the children to their new foster home and set them up there. When I was able to drive home, it was almost 8, and I arrived there around 9. The first thing I did was take a hot shower. I was wondering if I should call Bruce. Sometimes when I call him, we can talk for hours, but other times he is clearly limited in time. I got the impression that his clients can be very demanding. I usually try to wait for his call, but today I just needed to tell someone about my day. I was wearing a terry cloth robe, and I was just about to call Bruce when the doorbell rang. I pulled my robe closer around me and headed for the door. I opened it on a chain. Paul was standing there, looking so sweet and a little guilty. Can I come in? He asked. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied. I know that your husband has left town again. You're all alone. All I'm asking is to come in and chat. Maybe have a cup of coffee and talk. I can't, I said. You can trust me, he said. I don't trust you. To myself. Please give me a few minutes. I don't know why, but I let him in. She made us coffee and sat down with him on the opposite end of our big sofa. Sitting down, I lowered the hem of my robe. They were loose-fitting clothes, but too short to be comfortable in such a situation. Relax, he said. I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm here as a friend. I heard you had a hell of a day. Yes, I replied, and we continued to discuss my day, and it relaxed me. I told myself that there was nothing wrong with two friends sitting and drinking. We really switched from coffee to wine, and for dinner we ate frozen pizza. It must have been close to midnight when he said what he probably came for. Elaine, I will always be your friend, but you should know that I feel a passion for you that I can only call love. At these words, I shuddered nervously. Please, he said, let me finish. Now your husband is in New York, where he is meeting with representatives of organized crime and their personal anti-surveillance expert. They are planning how to defeat the government's wiretapping program. These are evil people, and he helps them escape justice. Stop it. I won't listen to this. It's not fair. Bruce is not here to defend himself. You are very loyal, but is it fair to you to be associated with such a person? Watching you and loving you, I found out what a wonderful and caring woman you are. Your life is about helping others. You are a saint married to the devil. But I want you to know that I will always be there for you, no matter what. During the evening, talking, we moved closer to each other on the couch. Before I knew it, his hands slipped into my robe and we started kissing. I knew it was wrong, but when his hands caressed my naked flesh and his lips pressed against mine, I realized that I couldn't hold back. His hands slipped into my panties and soon found my ready-made penis. I was wet because of him, and his touch was so pleasant. When his fingers slid into me, I let out a soft moan. We both knew where this was going to lead, but it was like a freight train that didn't want to stop. I was helpless, and then I heard the phone ring. He must have been calling for quite some time. Suddenly, this fact seemed to click, as did who was calling. Bruce, I said, pulling away from Paul's grip. Bruce was on the phone. Just checking, he said. I'm sorry, I probably woke you up. I've lost track of time. I pulled myself together to answer and try to speak normally. Bruce was in a talkative mood and kept going on and on. While Bruce was talking, I could see the floor on the couch getting more and more impatient. Finally, Paul smiled sadly at me and quietly left. Bruce's call saved me from irreparable disruption of my marriage. But did I want to be saved? Paul's touch still burned me. He made me feel a passion that no man has ever aroused in me. The district attorney's conference room had the dreary look of the last century, as if it hadn't changed a bit in the last 20 years, as it probably had. Tanya Marshall was the daughter of a former state senator, a man who escaped prosecution and retired with enough power to get his daughter into the district attorney's office. From the point of view of the district attorney, she was no better or worse than the rest of the pathetic people, oppressed, poor, and defenseless, and complaining that the rich can hire lawyers. "Where's your gun, Mr. Gray?" "What is it?" she asked. "We didn't find him when we searched your house." "A gun?" I asked. "Smith & Wesson, 44 Magnum registered to you. Is he missing?" "You know that it is. I'm sorry, this is the first time I've heard of it. It was kept in the top drawer of the nightstand in my bedroom. Is he really missing?" "Everything will be easier if we are honest with each other," she said. "Okay, start. What evidence did your officers allegedly extract from my house?" "All in good time," she said. "Well then, I'll answer your questions in due course," I said, getting up. "In that case," she said, handing me a notice of my right to appear before the grand jury. The real purpose of the meeting was this notification. I had no intention of coming here. The conclusion is obvious. I'm supposed to be charged with 2 counts of murder. To tell the truth, the district attorney had no choice. They broke into my wife's desk and seized her diary. They knew the whole sad story of her betrayal. Of course, in the minds of women like Tanya, it read like a love story with a tragic ending. My opinion was somewhat different. About the table, it was a shame. It was a narrow little desk, an antique from the late colonial period. For almost a year, he stood at the cellar's window. We were newlyweds, and our daughter Rachel was just learning to walk. Elaine attended evening college to earn a master's degree in social work. I was a poor newly minted lawyer, but I loved my wife and knew how much she wanted this desk. Every time we passed a display case, she stopped to look at it. I saved every penny I could get, but when I went to buy it for our anniversary, it was no longer in the window. With a sinking heart, I entered the store and asked for a small desk that stood in the window. The girl behind the counter looked puzzled, but when she asked the manager, he said that he was put in the back of the store. When he was delivered to our small apartment, Elaine was overjoyed. Over the years, I watched her sitting at that table and thought how lucky I was to have her as my wife. Love is a funny thing. I decided that it was all about these little moments. My wife's joy over the small antique table, my daughter's first steps, moving into our first house, and the pride of my wife, who received a master's degree. If you put all these moments together, you get what is called love. They opened the drawers of the desk and found the diary. I suppose I could leave the drawers unlocked, but then they might not pay attention to their contents. Locking the drawers gave him importance, and I needed them to take the diary. However, hacking the table hurt me. Perhaps it reminded me that Elaine is actually lost to me. The diary had the desired effect. Its contents soon leaked out. The pressure on the district attorney has increased. Now they had proof, and the public knew about the love plot. The unfaithful spouse and her companion turned into Romeo and Juliet, the 2nd of January. I can't do that, can I? Jenny just laughs at my indecision. What's the matter with you? Your husband is out of town. You come to his apartment and no one will know anything. It's still so simple. How can I meet Bruce again? I don't care what people say about him. He was always kind to me. What will I say if he finds out? Blame him for leaving you alone so often. He doesn't really leave that often, and when we're together, well, it's a good marriage. It's just that Paul makes me feel things I've never felt before. Like I said, Bruce won't find out, and if he does, just do what I did to my Bob. And what did you do? Do you remember the day we came here and he looked so upset? Yes, I remember at one point he asked if he could lie down in the bedroom. He looked almost ill. Well, that's how he found out I was sleeping with Paul, and I told him everything and that I still love him. I said there was nothing he could do about it, that a man like Paul could handle women. I think he wanted to kill this man, but he couldn't have done it physically. You're lucky he doesn't have a gun, I said. Moreover, I can't imagine Bruce perceiving everything the way Bob did. For some reason, I think Bruce will do something, but Jenny assured me that I was wrong. We discussed how much Bruce loves me and should have understood everything, just like Bob. I've seen Paul half a dozen times in the last 3 weeks. We were never alone, but I saw him here and there. He could have been following me or Bruce. My husband was at home and was very attentive. We made love almost every night because I was so horny, but lying to myself about it was useless. I may have been in bed with my husband, but I was thinking about Paul. Paul gave me a note today. It contained the address, date, and time. I'm sure this is the address of his apartment, and the date is the day Bruce will be in New York. I don't want to go, and yet I know I will. I tell myself, I'm going to go just to ask him to stop bothering me. January 15th. Oh my God, what have I done? I spent the afternoon at Paul's apartment. It all started well. I told him that nothing could happen between us, that I couldn't betray my husband, but then he kissed me, and everything went out of my head except how much I wanted him. He pulled me into his bedroom and began to undress me sensually. He unbuttoned my blouse and pulled it off my shoulders. Then he ran his hands over my arms. He pulled my hands behind my back and kissed me hard. When his tongue entered my mouth, he deftly unbuttoned my bra and let it fall to the floor along with my blouse. Continuing to kiss me, he began to take off my skirt. He knelt down and began to kiss my Venus bump through thin lace panties. Then he picked me up in his arms and carried me to his bed. There he took off the last remnants of my clothes. He started kissing me in all places. I left with tears in my eyes, thinking that this would never happen again, but none of us believed that this was the end. When I walked out of his front door, I knew I would definitely come back. Tanya's performance in front of the jury was much cooler than her usual performance. That is, it was good, and almost certainly the work of a literary Negro. Her boss was sitting there with her. Prosecutor Silva Marks wasn't going to let her subordinate get all the glory, but she wasn't stupid enough to think about doing the job herself. I was defending myself. The presiding Judge Bascom warned that a lawyer defending himself has a fool client. I replied that it was better than having a fool as a lawyer. Bascom was going to do everything possible to ensure that justice prevailed in the form of my conviction. He will go out of his way to help the lame prosecution, and in his instructions to the jury, he will turn the concept of reasonable doubt into something more consistent with the concept of guilty until proven innocent. For my part, I was only worried that someone would notice that I had an ace up my sleeve, and I was just waiting for the moment to play it. I had the truth on my side, but they had a romantic Romeo and Juliet story. The lovers were a police officer and my wife, a social worker. I was the villain in this story, regardless of whether I was guilty or not. Life is unfair and justice is rarely found in a courtroom. Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's car? Tanya asked her first witness. Yes, the car immediately aroused my suspicions. It was an old brown Toyota Camry. This is not the kind of car you would expect to see from an expensive lawyer, but it is very inconspicuous and has a large trunk volume. I see, Tanya said, looking at the jury with a smile that said, "You see how cunning the defendant is." What did you find in the trunk, if you found anything? Tanya asked. It looks like it was recently cleaned, but we were able to find hair and fibers that matched both Officer Paul Moreno and Elaine Gray. So their bodies could have been put in the trunk? Objection, this is a speculative question, I said. No, the witness is an expert, and he is just being asked for his opinion. The protest is rejected, the witness can answer, Judge Bascom said. That's how it went. Sergeant McVeigh was pleased to explain to the jury how, in his opinion, I transported and disposed of the bodies of my wife and her lover. On cross-examination, I asked, Sergeant, if the bodies were transported in a Camry, what happened to the bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby 500 GT? I don't quite understand what you mean. Paul Moreno's car. His stallion is nowhere to be found. I don't know that, of course, McVeigh replied. But you know for sure that his car is missing, and this car is not one of those that has nothing special, I said, addressing the jury more than McVeigh. Yes, Paul's car is missing. I'm going back to the Camry. You broke in, but tell me, why didn't you use the keys in the ignition? Maybe we didn't notice them. Really? But didn't you use them to open the trunk? McVeigh looked stunned for a second, but before he could say anything, Tanya got to her feet, objecting. The issue is controversial and involves facts that are not supported by evidence. Of course, she was convinced that there was no point in reporting the facts. She followed McVeigh to the podium with senior investigator Kim Eng. He told the story of how he tore off the carpet in the basement and found traces of blood under it. Have you been able to identify this blood by group or DNA? Tanya asked solemnly. No, she was too decomposed. There was a strong smell of bleach in the basement, which is why I suspected that we would find traces of blood there. Bleach is often used to remove blood stains. When the right to be questioned passed to me, I had only a few questions. Investigator, there was a home laundry in the basement, wasn't there? Yes. You expect to find bleach in the laundry room, don't you? I can't say. I think it depends on the personal preferences of the person who does the laundry. The 7 women on the jury didn't quite agree with Mr. Eng, but now it's time for a real show, starting with reading my wife's diary. January 16th. I feel guilty and soaring in the clouds at the same time. I can't stop thinking about Paul, about his gorgeous body and how he makes me feel. And at the same time, I feel so guilty about Bruce. For the first time, I want to believe all the terrible things that people say about him, but I know it's not true. Bruce has always shown his love for me, and I have repaid him with the most terrible betrayal. For some reason, I feel like my terrible sin has to come out, and Bruce, looking at me, will understand what I did to him, with us. The table I'm writing this on was a gift from Bruce. It was bought at a time when we had little money. This is a real antique. I saw it in the window, but I knew there was no way we could afford it. I was partly to blame for our poverty. I really wanted to have a child, but we got married only recently and couldn't think about children yet. Bruce has just started working. I was still in graduate school. Despite our poverty, I stopped taking contraceptives. It was supposed to be a mutual decision, but I took it upon myself. Bruce never judged me. He was extremely happy about my pregnancy. I knew he was worried about our finances and would like to wait until we were better off. Nevertheless, even when we were fighting like fish on ice, he somehow found the means to buy me an extravagant gift. My loving husband of the last 15 years, whom I betrayed so easily. I'm hesitating between never seeing Paul again and rushing out the door and throwing myself into my lover's arms. When Bruce returns from his trip in the evening, I'm sure he'll find out about it, and maybe this will put an end to everything one way or another. I don't know what I'm going to tell him. I can't bear to hurt him. January 17th. Nothing happened last night. If Bruce knew anything or even suspected what I was doing while he was gone, he didn't show any signs. And yet our communication looked somehow strange. It was as if there was some kind of distance between us. Maybe I'm artificially creating exactly what I'm afraid of. Bruce was acting and looking tired. For now, I have to wait and see. I left for work early so I wouldn't have to see Bruce in the bright light of the morning. I had barely arrived at work when my cell phone rang. It was Paul. He wanted to talk, and we talked until I had to get to work. Talking to him somehow lifted my spirits and gave me hope that everything would work out. That love will find a way out, and I have to admit that what I feel for Paul is love. Maybe not as eternal as Bruce and I have, but a deep and passionate feeling that I've never experienced before. January 19th. I chose the time and went to what I said was a long lunch, but I actually met Paul at his apartment. He works the shift from 4 to midnight. We had 2 heavenly hours together. Bruce seemed unperturbed at home, but I'm not sure if it's all in my head. We haven't made love since he got back from New York, but he's going to be home this weekend and I intend to make it up to him. The 12th of February. I've spent the last month in turmoil. My affair with Paul seems to be escalating. We see each other at his house at least twice a week during the day, and also in the evenings when Bruce is out of town, which has been happening a lot lately. Paul says Bruce is involved with very bad people. The FBI is very concerned because none of their surveillance attempts have worked. Bruce legally blocks their warrants and helps them purchase very sophisticated anti-wiretapping equipment. What is prohibited, but can be purchased with special permits. Paul didn't talk about it, but I know that part of his job is still to spy on my husband. I guess I should be glad that Paul almost always knows my husband's location, but the tension is growing. I found myself between 2 lovers. I love both of these men, and I see that they are enemies. I am trapped in this hopeless situation from which there is no way out. Bruce was the best husband, buying me little gifts for no reason, sending me flowers and making love to me. However, I can't get rid of the feeling that he somehow knows what's going on behind his back. He doesn't show any signs of knowing, but after 15 years, I can feel when he's worried, and something is bothering my husband. I'm sorry, Mr. Gray, but I don't see a problem in accepting your wife's diary as evidence, Judge Bascom said. We were in his office arguing about the prosecution's proposal to present the diary as evidence. I see, and the concept of rumors doesn't bother you at all, I said. There was no doubt that Elaine's diary was an out-of-court statement that was accepted as the truth. He falls under one of the exceptions to the rumor rule, Tanya objected. Really? Which one exactly? I demanded. Under a few, she replied, without putting anything concrete into her argument. I wasn't going to win this argument. Tanya believed that she needed the diary to consolidate my sentence, and the judge was going to use it in the case. The diary is in business. If I'm wrong, you can state this in the Court of Appeal, the judge said. In the appeal, the prosecution will argue that the confession of the diary was a harmless mistake. It would not be quite right, but what would it matter if I am guilty in truth? Everyone knew this, including the judges of the Court of Appeal. Tanya asked a very attractive employee from her office to sit on the witness stand to read my wife's diary. The girl was about 22 years old. She had dark brown hair arranged in a straight, simple hairstyle, deep brown eyes, and the most innocent look possible. She blushed so sweetly at the rougher parts of my wife's notes, and thereby deflected any condemnation the jury might feel about the depraved infidelity of the woman I loved, and to whom I had been faithful for 15 years. The 16th of March. Rachel returned home for spring break. I haven't seen or heard from my daughter since Christmas. She seems very happy. I don't know exactly why she wanted to go to boarding school, but I suspect it has something to do with the rumors about Bruce. She loves her father, but there's no getting away from what people say about him. It must be hard for a teenager. Since Rachel is at home, Paul and I cannot meet at my house, and Paul believes that there may be people at his work who suspect about his relationship with me. It would be bad for his career if our affair became known while he was on the team investigating Bruce's case. Paul is planning to ask for a transfer. He wants me to leave Bruce. However, when faced with this decision, I realize that what Paul is suggesting is wrong. Moreover, what I'm doing to Paul is wrong. My novel is wrong on many levels. When I saw Rachel, I realized that first of all, I was her mother and Bruce's wife. Neither of them had done anything worthy of the pain that my escape with Paul would have caused. The torment that I will cause my family is much greater than the pain that I will experience from losing my gender. I think I'm coming to my senses. This passion that possessed me clouded my senses. I need to come to my senses and do what I have to do to end Paul. I've made up my mind. When I see Paul tomorrow, I'll put an end to this. I know it's going to hurt him, but he'll get over it. I know for sure that he will not lack communication. Jenny is just waiting in the wings. She is a young and beautiful woman with a husband who has no choice but to put up with her infatuation with sex. A man like Bob can't do anything to a man like Paul. Everyone, as usual, thinks that Bruce is not that kind of man at all. Would Bruce hurt Paul if he found out? I don't believe Bruce will ever hurt me, but could I be wrong? The terrible things people say about Bruce, they can't be true. I've known him all these years. I've loved him all these years, and yet I doubt it. Paul is convinced that my husband can be dangerous and fears for my safety. I just can't bring myself to believe that Bruce would hurt anyone. When I look at Bruce, I see the dear, sweet man I married. Our daughter's loving father. The man who, over the years of our marriage, always put Rachel and me first. When I see Paul tomorrow, I have to break up with him. It's going to hurt, but I have to do the right thing. I called Jenny and said that the day after tomorrow, she might want to call Paul and comfort him. A pretty and young legal assistant, Tanya, has finished reading the last entry in my wife's diary. The prosecution hoped to portray me as a cruel, evil husband trying to get between lovers, but I don't think Elaine's diary was like that. In the end, my wife chose her house over a stalking Lovelace. Paul Moreno was the destroyer of the house. He knew that Elaine was happily married, but he still pursued her. Perhaps he completely believed all those vile stories that law enforcement officers told about me. Maybe he was trying to save the woman he fell in love with. In fact, the lovers waited too long and a terrible fate overtook them. There are a lot of ifs in a situation like this. If Elaine had confessed to me, or if they had ended the relationship earlier, who knows what might have happened. This was not my immediate problem. The problem was saving my neck. After reading the diary, the jury was ready to convict, and everyone in the courtroom understood this. I had a long list of witnesses, but only one mattered. Jake Trumbull appeared in court. He seemed like an ordinary witness on my witness list. His expert opinion consisted of 500 pages of some nonsense with a mention of the video on page 439. We started with his papers: a degree in electrical engineering from the Rochester Institute of Technology, service in Army intelligence, and then 20 years in the FBI. Not a bad resume. I overlooked that after working for the FBI, he joined the very criminal organizations that he prosecuted on behalf of the government. For me and others, he has proved invaluable in the fight against government surveillance. Mr. Trumbull, have you done any work for me in the past? Yes, many times. In the last case, when you worked for me, what did you do? I have installed a complete surveillance system covering your home and your office, both inside and outside. We call it the Black Veil because it is designed to uncover dirty deeds. What do you mean by dirty business? As usual, unauthorized entry to install listening devices or plant evidence. And did you find any dirty business? Yes, my staff and I watched as Sergeant McVeigh took the keys to the brown Camry and opened the trunk. Then he poured the material from the bag into the trunk. A little later, he returned with other officers and broke into the trunk with a crowbar. After that, the officers began collecting so-called trace samples from the trunk. There was a shocked murmur from the courtroom. Trumbull was on a roll and offered to watch the video he had collected. We have attached it to the evidence, despite the objections of the prosecution. Next, Trumbull told about the planted blood, which was discovered by investigator Eng. Needless to say, the prosecution's case fell apart. Without a forensic examination, they did not even have evidence that a crime had been committed. They only had a missing pair of lovers, a missing gun, and a car that no one could find. At the verdict of innocence, my daughter Rachel hugged me. The fact that she never believed that I killed her mother mattered. Many others thought I got away with murder. It is noteworthy that no action was taken against the officers who tried to frame me. In the end, they saved my life by giving the prosecution a case for trial. The long dry summer has turned Shokari into a muddy strip. It also exposed a blue Ford Mustang hidden in the deepest part of its riverbed. The bodies were still in the car. They must have been trapped in the frame of the car, even when the overflowing stream first carried the car away and then let it sink into the deep, rushing waters. They found Elaine's purse with a GPS navigator, which I left in the car, along with what was left of my wife's body. She was right, I was more than suspicious. I was collecting evidence of her infidelity. I loved her, and she hurt me deeply. As far as I understood, Paul Moreno was a snake who came to destroy a good marriage. It broke my heart, but I was planning a divorce, not a murder. However, the police would never have believed it. My wife and her lover were dead. Even if I were a saint, they would still consider me responsible, but I was far from a saint. Elaine was lying under her lover. It was obvious that none of them were fully clothed at the time of death. An autopsy revealed that they had both been shot, but as it turned out, the alleged victim was Paul Moreno. The bullets went through his body and hit Elaine. This double murder was the result of using such a powerful weapon. A .45 caliber Smith & Wesson was found on the floor of the Mustang. It was my gun, the one that was missing. If the police and the prosecutor had just waited, they wouldn't have had to plant evidence. The diary forced them to act. It was the story of lovers separated by a cruel and dishonest lawyer husband that forced the prosecutor to act prematurely. Public opinion has pushed the police to the usual litigation. I was framed, but skill and luck saved me. As a lawyer, I was proud of my work, while the law enforcement forces lamented that the system was being manipulated by an unscrupulous lawyer. Lottie put down her beer and gave me a winning smile. Then she put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed it as a sign of support. She didn't need to be told that she supported me. She showed it herself. We were at Chambers, a lawyer's bar in the city. Lottie changed her job, and I followed her out of loyalty. Overall, Chambers was a much more pleasant place for me to drink than Falcon's Rest. The police would never forgive me for beating them up, and the visitors here felt a certain sympathy for the loser, a poor, downtrodden lawyer with a ruined reputation. This opinion was completely wrong. The clients I needed to attract perceived my acquittal on charges of which I was so obviously guilty as the highest evidence of my legal skills. As a result of all this seemingly negative publicity, I was forced to raise the hourly rate and hire a pretty young employee to cope with the increased demand. Without being tainted by this strange case, I looked like an anti-hero. Poor Tanya, on the other hand, was forced to resign from the prosecutor's office, becoming a scapegoat for the failure. My drinking buddy drank half of his Sam Adams in one gulp. "Relax, Bob. There is no rush. I don't have a wife at home, and yours isn't worth coming home to," I said. Bob frowned slightly. I think he finally realized that some women, regardless of their physical attractiveness, are not worth messing with, and his Jenny certainly fell into that category. "I'm sorry for," he began, but clearly couldn't bring himself to continue. Please, I said. I didn't ask you to apologize. Of course, you have to understand that it doesn't make sense under the circumstances. But I didn't want Elaine to get hurt, he pleaded. Of course not. It was a pure accident. A man like you is not familiar with guns. You couldn't have known that bullets would go through Officer Moreno's body into the woman he was copulating with, I objected. That was all poor Bob needed. That's right. The seats were set up so that they lowered like a bed. I couldn't even see who was underneath it, and I was so upset. I was beside myself after Jenny said she was going to date him again. That's right. You were in a kind of unconsciousness, only vaguely aware of what you were doing. But tell me, did you wipe my gun for fingerprints before you planted it? I asked. Perhaps yes. I wasn't thinking straight. I stole it earlier, and my intention was to warn him. It was your gun because I knew you kept it in your bedroom for protection. Elaine was very happy to let me lie down when I said I wasn't feeling well. It was easy to find your gun. You didn't hide it. I think a man like you needs that kind of protection. Actually, it was a gift from a client. I put it in the bedroom to protect Elaine on the nights I wasn't home. He nodded solemnly, and I wondered if he had caught the irony of the situation. She told me that she would meet with him again. Exactly. Paul will need some friendly reassurance, she said. I couldn't just do nothing. I went to his house to warn him that I would not tolerate this. His car wasn't there. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. I'm afraid I've drawn the wrong conclusion. A reasonable mistake under the circumstances, I said. I knew where he took his cheating girlfriends in that disgusting car of his. It had already started to rain, and it was very dark when I reached the county road leading to the creek. I stopped on the road and went down to the stream. On a good night, the moon floods this place with light, but the weather has deteriorated. They were on the passenger side, but the driver's side window was partially lowered. I heard them laughing, and then she moaned in a way that struck me to the core. I didn't understand what I was doing. I shot without thinking, and then the gun seemed to fall out of my hand, or maybe I threw it. I didn't find out that Elaine was in the car until much later. I'm so sorry. Will you tell the police about this? What is it? He asked with a worried look. I shrugged my shoulders. Why, it's definitely not my place to judge you. I am a lot of people, but I am not a hypocrite. But I killed your wife, he said. Yes, but only by mistake. I don't know how the car ended up in the stream. I expected the car to be found immediately, but when it wasn't found, people started blaming you. Of course, without corpses and weapons, they could not prove my guilt. But the GPS, which I put in my wife's purse, told me where she was. I decided that because of the rising water, the car first got into a flooded stream and then sank when it filled with water. It was only a matter of time, the car, the bodies, or both. Since my gun was missing, I had a good suspicion about how the lovers died and who would be to blame for it. I regret this, and that many still consider you guilty. You have to turn me in, Bob said in a low, sad whisper. What can I say? We are not responsible for what people think, and I certainly cannot refute an attractive lie with an unpleasant truth. No, you're completely safe on my side, I said. Then why did you invite me here? To give you this, I said, taking a document out of my jacket pocket. What is it? He asked. My bill, of course. I put up a damn good defense against murder. But you defended yourself, he said. And whose fault was it? I have spent time and expenses, and the responsible party must pay. I can add that I did a damn good job. You should be happy. That's a lot of money, he said. It was just a good defense, I said. Do you accept American Express? Of course. I think Bob was relieved that I would keep his secret, but as I said before, I'm not in a position to judge. We live in a society where the presumption of innocence has been replaced by the presumption of guilt. In such an unfair world, a person must live by his own mind. Lottie brought me another Boston Lager when Bob was leaving. Are you okay? What is it? She asked with genuine concern in her voice. Yes, in the end, everything works out for the best.